we hack the code and flip the tag. Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet. Hey.
Hello and welcome to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. I'm your host, Kim Miller-Hershon. I am here with my guest, Natasha Paddock. And let me tell you a little bit about her before we get her wise words. So she is the CEO of the Cope Family Support Center. And they have a really important mission, and that is strengthening family relationships through counseling and parent education. Natasha has a background in social work and psychology, and she leverages her expertise in interpersonal communication, diversity, and inclusion to deliver impactful counseling services and parent education. And she leads an incredible team who really just does incredible work for the community and really breaking a lot of cycles and really teaching really important skills. And what I always think is so amazing is the butterfly effect of this kind of education, right? Because not only are you helping the family in the present, but it becomes generational when you teach people better skills. So it really change their expectations around what relationships should look like.
I think that's a phenomenal description.
So, all right. Okay. Before we get into the rest of the juicy stuff, I'm going to ask you your random question. When the zombie apocalypse comes, who are the three people you're going to take with you?
Oh, that's a great question because it's probably closer than we think, right? I have such a management mindset and it's so hard to turn off. And so I'm strategic. And so I'm definitely taking my husband because he is such an outdoorsman, like mixed with a little bit of MacGyver. So you definitely need someone with those type of survival skills.
Definitely.
I'm probably taking my bestie, Annie, primarily because we have a similar mindset. And so she's always looking for the quirks in situations, which becomes really important when you're building coalitions out in the zombie world, new factions. And then I think the third person that I have to bring with me is my mother, right? Like when you're going around and you're building all of these new factions and places, you need someone that's going to be able to kind of set up home for you. So we have the mental, the emotional, and the survival covered. So
All right.
we'll
I
see
like
if we
it.
survive.
Yeah. I like it. I just like the mindset that you're going to build coalitions with the zombies, right? Because
You have to, right? I think that if you watch the show, it's escaping me right now. It was the big zombie show that was out. Oh gosh, it'll
I
come.
can't think of what it is. Of course, all I can think about is Thriller, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, there's a lot of crossover skills that really comes into place when the world is ending. And so, that's my strategy.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's get into our conversation about unconventional versus conventional leadership, management, all the wisdom that you have to offer. So, the first question that I have for you is what is a piece of conventional wisdom that you followed early on only to figure out it did not work for you?
Yeah. Gosh, when you get to a point in your career, which I'm sure you think about tons of things that you're like, yeah, wish I could go back and change that. What's bubbling up for me right now, especially more recently, is this conventional thought that you don't bring emotion into leadership. And fundamentally, I think I understood what people meant by that, right? They mean be professional and be steady and don't let every feeling drive every decision. But I think as I've matured in my career, and especially having a non-profit business and a social work background, I think trying to separate emotion from leadership is just not realistic, right? And in many ways, it can be harmful. And so I think that you have to keep that human element at the center of the work that you do with human beings. I think that for a lot of the families that come through my agency, in particular, the staff that I hire, the talent that we invest in, if there's no ability to connect, then we lose focus of our mission very quickly. And
Right.
so I think for me, what I had to learn ultimately is that emotion is not the enemy of strategy, right? I think unmanaged emotion can absolutely be, it can create confusion. But I think when you're informed about emotions, it can actually create some sense of clarity. I think
Well,
compassion.
and you've had an interesting leadership experience because you were a leader and a manager very early in your career, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, prior to taking over here at Cope, I was in executive leadership and government. And so local government in 3 counties, actually. Most recently, before my transition, I was the assistant deputy director for homelessness in Alameda County, which is a large Bay Area county. And my time there, the work that I did in Alameda County was really focused on these large scale systems. And I think the leadership skills that I developed very early on when I started in Contra Costa County at all of 22 years old, got into management at 26. There is a heavy transition period that comes along with that, right? When you're fresh out of college, you're just getting your professional chops about you. And so that pretty much gave me a really unique experience, and that was being trained in management and leadership, which does not happen in many management careers. I think in part there was a little bit of an investment because I was so young. It was like, we have to make sure that this thing pans out. But it really did create a foundation for me in leadership that has helped me throughout my career.
That's awesome. All right, now that you are have successfully moved in from government to nonprofit and you've got a team and you're a successful leader, what's one thing that people look at you and they're like, "Oh, she's got it all figured out." And underneath it all, you're like, "Oh, I'm still wrestling with this."
I think the assumption is that I've mastered balance, and I have not. I think in my career I've learned to manage complexity, right? I think
Mm.
I know how to lead through crisis. I know how to negotiate partnerships or advocate in public systems or hold responsibility for agencies, but balance is definitely something that I still wrestle with. And I think many leaders continue to struggle with finding that balanced perspective between personal and professional, particular.
And I would also think that when you're mission driven, the there's also a balance between what do we fight for and what do we have to say maybe this is not either the right place or the right situation to put the energy in to try to win. What
Absolutely. Yeah, the challenge, especially in a mission-driven environment, is that you care deeply about everything, right? Your staff needs support, the community has needs, your partners have needs, your board have needs. So all of those things can converge. And I think often in leadership, it's this sweet spot between fulfilling those needs and also reminding yourself that you are a human being with needs, right? And in order to be effective for others, you have to first find that space and that peace for yourself. Sometimes with that, what I'll add is that balance may not necessarily be the right goal. Sometimes it's just about alignment, right?
Say a little bit more about that because that's really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm constantly asking myself lately is, am I spending my energy in ways that match my values? I think that becomes really critical for any mission, right? And so when I think about this in terms of alignment, what am I really saying yes to? And am I comfortable enough with saying no?
Oh, it's so interesting. I kid you not, Natasha. I'm in just about finished actually with writing my book. And I actually wrote the chapter this morning called The Yes Trap.
Wow.
Yeah. And very much talking about exactly what you just said, which
Yeah,
is that we have to have criteria other than is there space on my calendar?
absolutely.
And I think that's very often you're like, oh, it's a worthy ask. It's sure it needs to be done. I am capable of doing it. And yes,
Uh-huh.
I have space in my calendar
Yep.
for a meeting next week at that time, right?
Yeah.
And you don't take it any further than that, right?
Yeah.
It's like an automatic yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the question is, does that actually serve you? Does it serve the org, right? And yeah, I think there's a lot of other
And
considerations.
the other thing that I'm constantly grappling with is, am I modeling sustainability for my team, right? Because I think if I'm not doing that, then what I could be doing is unintentionally modeling burnout. And that is not effective for anyone involved, right? Especially an organization. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a trap. And having the wherewithal to understand that and the agency to pull yourself out of that
Right.
is really learned behavior.
100%, right? And I also think that if you're saying yes to everything, then where really are your priorities? Right?
If it's yes to everything, nothing is important, right?
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really interesting. All right, let's move on to another question. So, what would you say that you've had to unlearn as a leader as you have moved up in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think just following my career and coming into management and leadership very early, I think it is recognizing that strong leadership doesn't mean having all of the answers, right? I think sometimes it means being accountable for creating the spaces where those ideas start to generate. And a lot of that has to do with emotional intelligence and awareness of who to bring into those spaces, right? And I think a trap, to
Mhm.
use your terminology from our previous conversation, is really this perception that having all of the answers somehow creates high visibility and credibility. And I think it actually has the adverse effect. It can be very dangerous if you're not careful. Practicing certainty instead of curiosity really does not advance any goal, any mission, or any organization. And especially being so young and having to develop throughout my career is a lesson that I hold very close.
And I would add, because I think this is something that we don't think a lot about, is that as a leader of an org or of a team, if you present yourself with the one who has all the answers, then what you've done is trained your team to come to you with every single thing, right? You have trained them that you are the walking human FAQ,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then when do you have time to actually lead? Because now you are in the weeds.
Yep. And you
And
create bottlenecks, right?
that's right, you create bottlenecks. In
Yeah.
addition, which I think we forget this sometimes, that as leaders and managers, one of our responsibilities to our team is to help them grow their skills and
Yes.
their career,
Yes.
right? And we see this all the time where they have not had the agency to make decisions, right? They haven't practiced it. Then they get promoted and they're running a team and all of a sudden they're like a deer in headlights
Yeah, exactly.
because
Yes,
they haven't learned how to do that, right? And then we just keep creating we keep creating cycles, right? Which
absolutely. And I could not agree with you more. One of the things that I've always been aware of is when you cross that leadership threshold, a large part of your responsibility becomes the development of others, right? And so, really thinking intentionally about the lanes that you're providing for people so that they have an opportunity to feel a part of a team, a part of an organization. And a lot of that has to do with contribution. So if you're silencing everyone, whether intentionally or unintentionally, then things never progress beyond a certain point. And it just looks like a bunch of folks running in circles. Yeah.
and you also keep yourself, like you said, you're the bottleneck. You keep yourself talk about lack of balance, right? Or burnout or feeling stressed. And here I think is the so what I want to say to the listeners is that it's really important to examine some of your own thinking, right? Don't believe everything that you think, right? I've had actually a lot of guests, and I know that this is not, I'm going a little bit against the grain here because I know that a lot of guests have come on here and talked a lot about servant leadership. And maybe in theory, I think servant leadership can work. I think
Mhm.
what happens is a lot of the way that it plays out
Mhm.
is who's leading this ship, right? You know,
Exactly.
you see yourself as somebody who is supporting everybody, but the problem is somebody's got to be there to make the decisions to move things forward, to decide on new initiatives. And if you see yourself as supporting what is,
Yeah.
I see that as being a problem, right?
No, absolutely, right? Growth should not happen at the expense of depth, right?
There
And
you
so
go.
I think, and I'll use my agency as the example, right? We're in this growth spurt, and a part of that is really thinking about how do we scale? How do we expand? How do we move faster? How do we reach more people, right? And all of that matters, especially in a nonprofit environment. We want to serve more families. We want to increase access. I want to respond to community needs, right? But it's really not just about like how do we grow, but what are we growing into? And infrastructure is a huge piece of that, right? If folks don't feel a certain level of responsibility, which usually comes from contribution, right? People who are closest to the community being able to have a voice, then we're just running in place again, right? We're not actually making any strides towards any of those very wonderful goals. And so I wholeheartedly agree with having to provide an opportunity for development and new ideas to emerge, right? The diversity of thought is usually, in my opinion, how great things are manifested.
Absolutely. What would you say is one unconventional habit or mindset shift that's really helped you grow as a leader and I think in the end help your agency grow as well?
Yeah, I think one area that has come up in terminology more so recently is this kind of thought about imposter syndrome, right? And so I think that this is something that all leaders struggle with. And I had this really wise woman named Donna Thorison. She was my intern supervisor many moons ago. But she talked to me one time about life transitions, right? And I thought it was such a powerful conversation as someone who's just coming into a professional world. And what she said is there's going to be multiple transitions throughout your lifetime. And these are usually opportunities for you to stop, do some introspection, take stock of where you are and where you want to be. But she said at the core of those, there's this unearthing that typically happens where you are now a new, more advanced version of yourself. And that can be scary because in many instances, you're having to relearn who you are in this space or this environment. And that usually shakes confidence and creates this space of me feeling like, oh my gosh, do I belong in this environment? Do I belong at this table? And so that really resonated with me. And that's something that I try and be conscious about when I'm bringing new leaders on into spaces, and even for myself as things expand and grow for me in my career.
That's such an interesting thought. I think about the I am statements that we make,
Mhm.
right? About ourselves because it's how we define ourselves. And then that process of really having to examine that, right? It's the stories that we tell ourselves about
Mhm.
ourselves that, on the one hand, humans contextualize where they are and what happens and why things happen to them, and it's the nature of being human. But I think that the what really intrigues me about what you're saying is this redefinition, the examination and the redefinition of who I am, right? And really, right, it's not just, we don't do it just as a leader or as I am at this table, who am I? But relative to the communities that you support, right? Who am I as a parent, right? Who am I as a child, right?
Mhm.
One of the most, I think, powerful transformations I think that I made as a parent was really taking the opportunity to stop playing out being an adult child, right? It's very interesting. Like when you don't have role models that you want to just do what your parents did, right? And you could say, if you didn't have leaders, managers, mentors in your career that you want to emulate, and you have to figure out who you are in those situations, right? First of all, it's unbelievably impactful and powerful, but it's hard work.
It very much is. I think for many women, imposter syndrome is not just an internal issue, right? And I think you can layer that on women of color or people of color, right? Sometimes things are connected to real experiences around being underestimated or overlooked or having to prove your credibility. So sometimes I think we show up in these spaces almost prepared for the negative effect, right? And it takes a second to really have to bring yourself down off of that ledge, right? One of the things for myself, I think for all of the things that I just mentioned, including stepping into a career very young, is I constantly have to remind myself that, wait a minute, no, I've done the work, right? I have sat with families, I've led teams, I've managed systems, I've built partnerships, right? It's a reminder that no, I absolutely belong in these spaces and my voice does count. And it's not always an easy thing to do, especially if you're growing in your career. As you ascend, spaces get smaller, experiences vary, sometimes they're removed from your own, and it can be intimidating.
And I think in the last number of years, as a, if you're listening to this on audio, I am a white person, right? And I think that I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a melting pot. I think if you had asked me before, I think my new sensibility, I would be like, I'm like one of the most sort of inclusive people that you would ever meet. What are you talking about? I don't think that I ever understood. My privilege is that I'm white. I'm walking into a room with mostly a majority of white people. And it doesn't matter if my politics match them, if my experience matches them, if my level of income matches them. The privilege is that I look like everybody else in the room, right? And I think I had the experience recently, which was and this was just a couple of months ago. So I'm a crafter, right? And I got a ad on Instagram that invited me to a craft at I didn't even actually really know what it was. It was my yes drop. I was like, yes, like this
Just
looks
accepted a
fun.
random
I was just
invite on Instagram.
right. I'm like, this looks fun.
You always selected dare and truth or dare, right?
Yeah. So I just said yes, right? And here is what's really interesting. And like I said, I am from the San Francisco Bay Area. I grew up here. I went to public school, very integrated. And I walked into that workshop. It was actually in a retail store. I didn't even know that, right? It was in a retail store. I was the only white person there.
Wow.
And I think what surprised me is that I honestly, Natasha, am not sure that I've ever had that experience before.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I was surprised. I was like, "Oh, isn't this interesting, right?" It was so much fun. And I made the most killer blazer. It was outstanding
Yeah.
and such a special experience. And everybody was like super nice to me. And I was very comfortable being in the room, but
Yeah.
also just just surprised that I
Yeah.
had not had that experience before. And I don't know that I have any meaning that I associate with it other than I think a sensibility of this is what our brown and black brother and sisters, this is their experience on a daily basis, right?
Yeah. I like that example, right? Because it speaks to the old adage about walking a mile in someone else's shoes. It's the things that are not conscious to us because we're not exposed to them. And I think what stands out for me in that example is really confidence is sometimes walking into a room and having the fear, but still being your authentic self, right?
Yeah.
And I think enough of those experiences and still having that ability to show up, you could have left, right? You could have felt uncomfortable, you could have felt out of place, but staying there and gaining that experience is usually the thing that takes us to the next level. And so I think that's
Right.
a great example of many instances of what people experience on a day-to-day basis and how they persevere through that and hold those experiences, right? And when I think about just my life in general, I am right there with you. I'm a Bay Area native, and so I think we're very fortunate here, especially in Northern California, to be so exposed to such a diverse array of cultures and languages and foods and experiences that it really does help to harmonize the notion of coexistence, right? But at the same time, not everyone's experience is the same. And so I think it's really valuable when we can hold those, when we can be truthful about those experiences and still walk in a space of truth to share that experience with other people. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And when we think about leadership and management, and we think about meeting people where they are instead of assuming that we know what their
Right.
experience is. It's really interesting. I saw a video a while ago. It was around assumptions that we make about people in the workplace. One of the things that has really stuck with me, there are some things that felt more obvious, right? Oh, you see the color of my skin, or you see where I'm from, and you make assumptions because of that, or you see that I'm gay or something like that. But you know what? The one that really got me
Mm.
was, you see that I'm single and I don't have children. So you expect me to do the extra things. You expect that
Yeah,
my free time is not as valuable as other people's free time.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
thought that was a really interesting bias
yeah.
that we have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that what's so amazing about this time that we're living in, I have to lean into the positivity because there's so much for us to talk about on the other side. But I will definitely say that there is such an awareness about traditional mindsets when it comes to the workforce, when it comes to how people establish their careers or what their career choices are. And hearing that just really makes me think about how far we've come. And I'll be very honest with you, even in my time, I'll say that the pandemic was really a turning point, one that I personally witnessed a transformation in leadership and management about how we expected people to show up, about honoring and validating people's truths, which I really do hope is something that is centered in every organization, or at least in the minds of leaders who are at the helm of these organizations and responsible for culture and really some level of integrity in spaces that other people are employed to be in. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really important one to keep at the forefront.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This has just been such an amazing conversation. Let me just ask you, we talked a bit about imposter syndrome already. I think what I'd love to conclude with is just asking you if you have any advice for any of our listeners around when you may be feeling that imposter syndrome. What do you do to get yourself either back to center or even moving forward? Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, I think the thing for me that becomes really important is to lean into that feeling, right? Why am I feeling out of place? Is it valid, right? Am I not prepared? I think as leaders, we often have to ask ourselves some hard truths, right? Am I not prepared to be in this space? What do I need to do to get myself to a place of readiness? But if I know that I am, and I know that my credibility is behind me, then what barrier, internal or external, is standing in my way from taking my rightful place in this space, or the proverbial seat at the table, right? And I think the other thing is just remembering all of the amazing things that you've done to get you to this space, right? Those things can't be haphazard. In life, you'll get one or two coincidences, right? But if you've had a positive stride personally or professionally, then you're doing something right, and own that, right? Be gracious to yourself about who you are and the things that you've done. And I think when you can really anchor and center yourself in those positive thoughts and affirmations of who you are and what you represent, then those things can help you manage that feeling of imposter syndrome, which is really just born out of some source of anxiety or self-doubt.
Actually, the thing that you said that resonates most is everybody starts from a place of, I feel what I feel. How do I combat it? And you just gave us such a gift of, let's look underneath the feeling,
Yeah.
right? And really uncover our own story. Actually, when I said, like, you shouldn't believe everything you think,
Yeah, like
you,
there's actual clinical evidence that says
yeah.
that could be detrimental, right?
When all you do is try to counteract the feeling,
Yes.
you never get to the root source of what your story is about that. So there isn't really a way to reframe. So I just love that advice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, friends,
This has been
you've
fun.
done it.
I didn't
This
talk your ear off, did I?
Yeah, this was such an amazing conversation. I think what I'm going to say is tell your friends to listen to this because this is a good one. I think for Natasha, I think their services are really based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they take donations from all over the country and the world. So they're doing some really important good work. So please, we'll put the website and the donation link in the show notes, and just know there is no donation too small or too big. Please support the org. They're doing really good important work. And for me, check out my free webinar that is coming up because it is chock full of good information and not a pitch fest. If you feel like you as a leader are shooting on yourself, come and find out how you can get out from under that. This is Kim Miller-Hershon. You've been listening to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. Go out there and be a better human.
Thank you, Kim.
Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet.